I wanted to ask you, do you know what the original 13 states were?
No.
200 years ago, 13 British colonies said no to domination by the Crown, and a nation was begun. Today, the Bicentennial Council of the 13 original states presents this film because we want you to know about those times, those events, those places, and these states. This is the meeting house at Sandown, New Hampshire. In places like this, ideas carried in the hearts of individuals are sometimes nourished. And when the time comes and there's a convening of minds, the results can change the course of human events. Let's go back to George III's time, when the King's mark was put on the best New Hampshire white pines by order of the Royal Surveyor. This meant the tree was reserved for exclusive use by Mother England. In a colony burdened by the Stamp, Sugar, and Currency Acts, the fair ownership of natural resources became a heated issue. For 100 years, these trees had supplied ships of the Royal Navy with masts and spars. But now, even the moderate people of New Hampshire had thoughts of rebellion. In December 1774, Paul Revere brought alarming news to Portsmouth. The British were expecting trouble at nearby Newcastle, and they were going to reinforce the garrison at Fort William and Mary. This was too much for local patriots, so they stormed the fort and captured cannon and about 100 barrels of gunpowder. At that time, Portsmouth was important because of its shipbuilding industry. Later, during the Revolution, it was home port for many vessels of the young American Navy, whose hero John Paul Jones lived in Widow Purcell's genteel boarding house while waiting for his ship, the Ranger, to be outfitted by local shipbuilders. Today, they use the same type of tools and techniques when building dories here as they did in his time 200 years ago. The original name of Portsmouth was Strawberry Bank, a name given by the first settlers who arrived here in 1631 and found the embankments of the Piscataqua River covered with wild berries. The settlement grew, nourished by the fishing, lumbering, and shipbuilding industries which thrived here, and by 1775, the population had reached 4,500. For years, this part of Portsmouth was practically forgotten. But in 1957, a group of local citizens finally won acceptance of their proposal to use urban renewal funds for the restoration of Strawberry Bank. At a revolutionary muster here, you can even learn how women contributed to the revolution by making paper cartridges by the thousands. Both the ball and the powder were placed together in these tubes. This enabled loading and firing a lot faster than when a man had to ram in the ball and pour the powder from the horn. Early colonial ingenuity. So often a man and a house are interrelated. When a man's name is in the history books, it's his home that enables us to picture him more clearly as a real person. The Moffat Ladd House here in Portsmouth, as an example, was the home of General William Whipple. As a young man, he'd been a sea captain, and in just 10 years he'd made a fortune. He established himself as a merchant and became active in what they called provincial affairs. In 1776, Whipple and Dr. Josiah Bartlett, who lived in this house in Kingston, were sent to Philadelphia. There, these men had the honor, after John Hancock, of being the first delegates to sign the Declaration of Independence. The delegates signed by colonies, starting with the most northern and moving down. Dr. Matthew Thornton, another New Hampshire signer, appeared in Congress 3 months later and had to add his name below that of the Connecticut delegates. These were the 3 men of New Hampshire who, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor.
Mankind in a state of nature are equal, free and independent of each other, and have a right to the undisturbed enjoyment of their lives, their liberty and property.
So read the Sheffield Declaration, which was written 3 years before the colonies declared their independence. It was drawn up by a committee of citizens from the town of Sheffield in western Massachusetts, and it was one of the first written expressions of mass dissatisfaction with British domination. The document was largely the work of Colonel John Ashley, who lived in this house near Ashley Falls in Berkshire County.
Any determination of the king, whereby private property is affected, is a great grievance.
When the Revolution came, the Paul Revere of this Berkshire area was Israel Bissell, who is buried in nearby Hinsdale. He was a young post rider who actually outdid Revere by galloping for 4 days, 6 hours and some minutes from Massachusetts all the way to Philadelphia, with word of the battles at Lexington and Concord. He stopped only to exchange horses and to alert the militia in 5 of the colonies. Men like Bissell were the newscasters of the time. The Lexington Belfry was still ringing its summons the night of April 18, 1775. At Buckman's Tavern, instead of the handful of regulars gathered around a cheerful blaze, sipping their rum and toddies, excited men were coming and going with the news that the British were on their way from Boston to arrest Sam Adams and John Hancock for treason. Buckman's Tavern was the headquarters of the Minutemen, organized by Captain John Parker. And very early the following morning, the men left the tavern and assembled on the Lexington Green to await the enemy. When the British arrived, their commander, Major Pitcairn, ordered the rebels to disperse. They refused, and the tension mounted. And then came the shot heard around the world, but who had fired it? After the volleys that followed, 8 Massachusetts men lay dead and 9 wounded on the Green, and His Majesty's soldiers continued on to Concord. There they searched for hidden supplies thought to be stored in homes, shops, and barns. Some of the troops took their time in the search. Others moved on to the North Bridge that spanned the Concord River. About 400 American militia had assembled on a nearby hill and looked down on the force of bright redcoats. Outnumbered and astounded as the farmers advanced, the British fired, killing 2 Minutemen. The Americans responded. 3 of the enemy lost their lives, and the rest retreated to Boston.
They did not fight us like a regular army, only like savages.
Less than 2 months later, these savages had become organized into the semblance of an army, and on June 17, 1775, they met the British in the Battle of Bunker Hill. The events of the day are reenacted each year. With 2,400 troops under the command of General William Howe, they attack Breed's Hill next to Bunker Hill. They're driven back by the Americans. A second attempt is made. In the third assault, the British have discarded their heavy packs weighing more than 100 pounds, and they storm the defenses, fire at close range, and immediately follow with a bayonet charge. The Americans, running short of ammunition, retreat.
Many British redcoats have fallen. Many men to be buried on Bunker Hill.
Almost a year later, the British evacuated Boston. For years, Boston had been the center of political activity, led by such men as John Hancock and Samuel Adams, who believed that putting your enemy in the wrong and keeping him so was a wise maxim in politics as well as in war. Adams was buried in this old granary burial ground by Park Street Church, along with the victims of the Boston Massacre of 1770, Paul Revere and Mother Goose. Mary Goose may have written nursery rhymes, but Abigail Adams wrote this to her husband John.
Be more generous than your ancestors. Do not put such power on the hands of husbands. That your sex is naturally tyrannical admits of no dispute. But if attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no representation.
Remarkable words for a woman of the 18th century. Her husband replied,
As to your code of laws, we are told that our struggle loosens the bands everywhere. Children are disobedient, colleges turbulent, Negroes insolent. But yours is the first intimation that another tribe are discontented.
The right to protest is now a part of our free way of life. But it was Boston that showed us how to use that right in an effective manner. In 1742, Peter Faneuil, a wealthy merchant, presented a gift to his city, Faneuil Hall. He decreed that it should always be a marketplace for goods on the ground floor and a marketplace for ideas above. In one of the most famous rooms in America, protests against the Stamp Act were heard, and at town meetings ideas were developed, ideas that did much to shape the action of the colonies. This room seems to symbolize Boston itself, a place which thrives on controversial exchanges as a way to progress.
That is really nothing but a legend. In fact, when he was apprehended according to that legend, he was not mistreated by the English. Because you see, the English at that time treat the colonials here, they said, like people that did not know the trouble they would be, and they did not want to kill them.
Paul Revere had made friends with many of the revolutionary group at the Old North Church, who were sea captains and who were people leading the revolutionary group. And one of those was Robert Newman, the sexton of the church.
You see, they were English here too. They were not independent yet. He says, we don't want to disturb you, but keep quiet, otherwise you will have to do something. Very likely he never took a ride. Maybe he went to some saloon to have a drink.
That they would show lanterns in the Old North Church steeple. The Old North Church steeple had been built 18 years after the church, 1723, as a lighthouse for the West Indian merchantmen. It was the highest point of land in Boston. A light could be seen from there 10 miles at sea. So it was the natural place to hang a signal lantern.
Our streets are again filled with armed men. Our harbor is crowded with ships of war. but these cannot intimidate us. Our liberty must be preserved. It is dearer than life. Our country is in danger. Our enemies are numerous and powerful, but we have many friends, and determining to be free, heaven and earth will aid the revolution. You were to decide the important question on which rests the happiness and liberty of millions yet unborn.
The words were spoken in 1775, 5 years after the Boston Massacre. The spot where a band of ruffians had taunted the British is on Boston's Freedom Trail. Nearby is the old State House, referred to by Abigail Adams in another letter to her husband.
I went with the multitude into King Street to hear the proclamation for independence read from the balcony of the State House. The king's arms were taken down and every vestige of him burnt. Thus ends royal authority, and all the people say, Amen.
At Saugus, Massachusetts, the Socialites Girls Band is rehearsing at the old ironworks. In the 17th century, over a ton of iron a day was produced here. Nails, hammers, axes, and other tools for the colonists. But they had stopped operating long before the time that Nathaniel Greene, the son of a blacksmith, was growing up in his father's business in Warwick, Rhode Island. When the tidings of Lexington reached him, he mounted his horse and rode off to be a private soldier in the war, little dreaming that he'd become one of America's most important generals and his state's greatest military hero. After the British evacuated Boston, General Greene's home was used as a convalescent hospital for officers who had been vaccinated against smallpox. This disease was just one of the many ailments that plagued the armies at the time. Without anesthetics and antiseptics, mortality from disease and wounds was appalling. Regimental surgeons were often incompetent, and even George Washington referred to some of them as very great rascals. He probably would have applied the same term to artists had he seen all the different likenesses of himself that would circulate around the world. But the world's most reproduced portrait was painted from life by the artist Gilbert Stuart. His father ran this snuff mill in Saunderstown, Rhode Island. Stuart had the distinction of painting portraits of the first 6 presidents of the United States, one of whom John Adams had appropriately written,
I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, commerce, agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, and music.
The room in which Gilbert Stuart was born is a bourning room, and to our knowledge, Gilbert was the last baby born in that bed. The keeping room is a formal living room and a formal dining room. Now, throughout the house, the furniture is authentic Stuart's or is of the same period. There are no replicas.
"140 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed, Roger Williams founded a settlement dedicated to the separation of church and state and complete religious liberty, and he named it in commemoration of God's merciful providence. The Benefit Street State House here in Providence was where the General Assembly met during the winter, and nearby is Brown University, one of the oldest colleges in America. And speaking of America's colleges, we might recall Thomas Jefferson's remark about not sending American youth to Europe for education. If he goes to England, he wrote, he learns drinking, horse racing, and boxing. These are the peculiarities of a British education. He acquires a fondness for European luxury and a contempt for the simplicity of his own country. In another century, such fondness for luxury produced some rather remarkable cottages in Newport. But in colonial times, American pride and simplicity even extended to cooking. Benjamin Franklin defended Rhode Island's Johnny Cake after a derogatory article appeared in a European paper.
Pray let me, an American, inform the gentleman who seems ignorant of the matter that Indian corn, take it for all in all, is one of the most agreeable and wholesome grains in the world, and that Johnny Cake or hoe cake, hot from the fire, is better than Yorkshire pudding.
The first Anglican priest sent to Newport's Trinity Church was the Reverend David Methuen. On his voyage over from England, he was listed as sharing his cabin with a male cousin. But some months later, after their arrival, the cousin displayed some of the more obvious attributes of the female, and the good Reverend departed the local scene in disgrace. Despite this questionable beginning, Trinity survived, and it's now the oldest Episcopal parish in New England. People of many faiths were attracted to this settlement in Newport because of the complete religious freedom that was practiced here ever since its founding in 1639. 120 years later, ground was broken for Touro Synagogue, and under the leadership of Rabbi Isaac Touro, the congregation Yeshuat Israel grew and prospered. Later, the Sephardic Jews of Newport inspired a moving letter on the subject of religious freedom by George Washington, who visited the city after the war. "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land," he wrote, "continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." From the steps of the old Colony House, the Declaration of Independence was read to the people of Newport, but Rhode Island had already renounced its allegiance to King George a few months earlier. The old Colony House was one of Rhode Island's 5 state houses, and from early in the colonial period until the turn of the present century, the General Assembly met here each May. Here in the Senate chamber you can see Gilbert Stuart's painting of George Washington as president. As a general, he had been in Newport to meet with the Comte de Rochambeau, who had come with a French army to help the Americans. Headquartered in the Vernon House, the French commander had been here for a year awaiting the lifting of a British blockade. Now, in 1781, he and his 6,000 men would begin moving south to Virginia.
Sam's gone away aboard the war. Pretty work, brave boys, pretty work, I say. Sam's gone away aboard the man of war. Right, that was for me, aboard the man of war. Sam's gone away aboard the man of war. Pretty work, brave boys, pretty work, I say. Sam's gone
An old English sea chanty accompanies the sound of the winch on the HMS Rose. This is a replica of a British warship based in Newport Harbor and open to the public.
Pretty work, brave boy, pretty work, I say. Sam's gone away.
The Rose's great cabin served as the captain's office and dining room. The ship carries nearly 30 cannon, most of them 9-pounders.
Hard. Run her out. Frickin' prime. Aim your piece. Fire!
To go back in time, the Rose sailed to Connecticut to capture merchant vessels and shell the town of Stonington. That was in 1775. 6 years later, in the closing months of the war, the mood in Connecticut was quite different. When Rochambeau's army passed through the state, one of his men reported,
The inhabitants of Connecticut are the best people in the United States without any doubt. They have a lively curiosity and examined our troops and all our actions with evident astonishment. I cannot refrain from reporting a very extraordinary custom of this charming province, which is known as bundling. A stranger or a resident who frequents a house and takes a fancy to a daughter of the house may declare his love in the presence of her mother and her father without their taking it amiss. If she looks with favor upon his declaration, he can propose bundling with her. This means going to bed with her. The man may remove his coat and his shoes, nothing more, and the girl takes off nothing but her kerchief.
not only thoughts of love, but music played a vital role in military life during the Revolution. As one author wrote, it was an integral part of the soldier's daily life. He woke to it, marched to it, and laid down his head to sleep by it. Benedict Arnold, who had distinguished himself in Connecticut's only other major battle, the Battle of Ridgefield, returned to his native state after his defection to the British. In 1781, he led an attack on the Groton, New London area. This resulted in a massacre of the American garrison here at Fort Griswold and the setting of fires on the New London docks that nearly consumed the entire town. Connecticut was known for its Newgate prison, where Tories were kept in an old copper mine, as well as being known for a unique invention. Today, a nuclear submarine passing New London recalls that time in 1776, when David Bushnell designed the Turtle, America's first submarine. In the Groton Submarine Base Museum, there's a model of the ingenious craft. One hand on a crank propelled it. The other hand was on a boring mechanism for drilling a hole in the bottom of an enemy ship. Though Bushnell's attempts were unsuccessful because the British had reinforced their hulls with copper plates, his design was a model of American ingenuity. Toward the close of the war, hopeful invention had turned to realistic planning. It was 1781, and the Webb House in Wethersfield, Connecticut, was the scene of a crucial meeting between Washington and Rochambeau. Washington wanted to attack New York City. The experienced Frenchman favored moving south. He gave in to Washington's argument, but subsequently Rochambeau's strategy proved to be correct. The Allied armies bypassed New York, attacked Yorktown, and brought the war to a close. In the Webb House, this room had been especially wallpapered for General Washington's visit, and today that same paper is still on the walls. Despite the revolution, in so many aspects of our way of life, the ties with England have never been broken. The tradition of maintaining inns, for example, is well kept up in New England. And we might recall Samuel Johnson, who said,
There is nothing which has yet been contrived by man, by which so much happiness is produced, as by a good tavern or inn.
That famed English literary figure would have felt at home in a place like this, discussing the problems of the times and sampling some of the beverages that our forefathers and mothers enjoyed. Now you have to understand that during the Revolution there were many reasons for drinking. For one thing, liquor provided courage in the field, and Washington himself once complained of an inadequate supply of the Army's regular daily ration of rum for his men. For another, it was a makeshift anesthetic for the wounded, and in the absence of central heating, it warmed the body, often very early in the day. There were mixtures like Calibacus, which was half rum, half beer, and Stonewall, half rum, half cider, and a particularly potent concoction called Blackstrap, rum, molasses, and vinegar. In Essex, a windmill overlooks the Connecticut River. You've come here to pause a while and to reflect on the part of America you've just experienced. It was here in New England that the Revolution was born, and it's in places like Essex that a way of life has room in a changing world. Only because ideals and values are preserved with the same spirit that made a revolution succeed some 200 years ago.